Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar for the new MA programme, Sustainability and Global Environmental Futures. I have to begin with a very brief apology. I've just run across campus from a lecture on volcanism and history after imperialism. So I'm just going to collect myself, draw a breath, and warmly welcome you. So the format for today is that I have a presentation that I'm going to make, which talks about sustainability and global environmental futures. I'm going to introduce myself and Carlos Galvez Lopez, who's the co-convener. I'm going to speak a little bit about my research. I'm going to speak a little bit about the delivery and the characteristics of the new MA. And then Ben Dalton, who is convening the MA on Global Health Humanities, is going to come and talk about that programme. So I will share, bear with me just a moment while I share my slides. Right. So I'm going to ask Ben Dalton to confirm with me by WhatsApp that the slideshow is displaying correctly, because I can't see. Until I hear from him, I'll just carry on. So it's lovely to welcome you to this webinar, which introduces one of 4 new Global Leadership Masters courses, which will be taught from this year. Thank you, Ben. From this year through principally the School of Global Affairs at Lancaster University, drawing on expertise from across both the faculty and the university. So to introduce you to the 2 people who have led the convenership, I suppose, of this new module. That's myself. I teach in the Department of History at Lancaster University, and my brilliant colleague, Carlos Galvez, who teaches at Lancaster Institute for Contemporary Arts. So I'm going to say a little bit about my own interests. I would emphasize that all of the programs are interdisciplinary. We draw on methods and expertise in order to give, I suppose, the necessary complexity and diversity to exploring the challenge of sustainability. To begin to introduce that, I want to say a little bit about my own research. So I am by training a historian of modern South Asia. My training was done at Jawaharlal Nehru University in Delhi some years ago now. I've been teaching for some years at Lancaster University. A couple of years ago, I began a project, a collaborative British Academy project on deserts, looking at the landscape, ecology, and idea of the desert in South Asia, but also in East Africa. So it was a collaborative project between Somaliland and India. As part of that project, I became very interested in Sambar Salt Lake in Rajasthan. Rajasthan is a state in the northwest of India, which together with Gujarat accounts for the majority of arid landscapes. And it's also where the boundary with Pakistan exists. The Sambar Salt Lake has been a site for the production of sodium chloride, rendered consumable by human beings for hundreds and hundreds of years. It came to the attention of the colonial authorities in the 1860s when the desire to create an exclusive monopoly on salt production sort of entered the mind of the government of India. So the salt monopoly is quite famous in terms of Indian history. So you might know about the salt hedge that was built across the subcontinent in an attempt by the government to stop salt smuggling. The question of the imperial monopoly on salt production was also made famous by Gandhi's salt protest that took the simple and easy elemental act of rendering any brine, whether subterranean brine or marine brine, into salt. He transformed that into an act of protest, profound protest against an imperial monopoly. So Sambar Salt Lake didn't exist within British India. It was actually held apart in princely India. So the government of India set apart creating a treaty that would give it access to this salt resource. It then, from the 1880s through the 20th century until 1947, when India attains its freedom, set about engineering the lake to create, the presumption was that Sambar Lake offered an unlimited, limitless resource for the creation of salt that could then be controlled, distributed, and taxed by the imperial salt authorities. The problem was the monsoons. The problem was that brine, salt water, was a necessary precondition for the creation of crystallized sodium chloride. But the monsoon was irregular. The monsoon changed. Sometimes there was too little water, sometimes there was too much. So a variety of attempts were created to engineer the lake to control its ecology, to control and contain the ecology of the monsoon. That led to the creation of a huge boundary, a bund, to contain salt water in one part of the lake. New strategies for pumping subterranean water were created. Railways were introduced to hasten the extraction of salt from the lake and to take it out of princely India, back into princely India. So I've shown some images which are from my research on Sambar Lake. One is part of the disused infrastructure of salt production and extraction. The image below is of a woman labourer smashing the crystallized salt to the surface of the water. This is the only way that salt is being produced, despite the various attempts to re-engineer the lake to stabilize the production of salt. Salt water, brine, is collected in pans, crystals form at the top, and then somebody goes manually and smashes those crystals so that they fall to the bottom, and a fresh layer of crystals assemble themselves at the top, creating a kind of a more and more concentrated brine solution until large crystals can be extracted, dragged to the side of the pans, and then sold as salt. What's happened to those consecutive attempts to control and engineer the ecology of the lake has precipitated what are now called the brine wars. So after 1947, the government maintained control of the extent of the lake. However, there was no control over private salt production around the edges of the lake. So you can see those tiny little squares of salt pan production. Essentially, now what we have is a situation where private salt production which was positively encouraged after independence in the 1950s, and the Hindustan salt companies' control over salt production in the lake has come to a vicious head, including materials, equipment being smashed up, somebody being once shot in a marketplace. This fight to control salt production, however, the greatest victim has been the ecology of the lake, where the rapid preference for bore well at the extraction of brine has led to the kind of cataclysmic depletion of groundwater. So this is one of my research ways of understanding and thinking about sustainability. All the imperial government wanted to do was create sustainable conditions of salt production. That sustainability, however, pursued the power of the colonial state to determine the conditions of salt production. I suppose this is an opportunity to ask ourselves what we mean by sustainability. When we talk about something being sustainable, what are those attributes that we want to see maintained? So what of the complex conditions, for example, salt production at Sambar or in any other context, what is it we want to sustain? Is it the supply of salt? Do we want to have a sustainable supply of salt, even if it means depleting the groundwater? Do we want to have a sustainable supply of clean air? And also for whom should something be sustained? Is it in the interests of those who produce, commercialize, sell a particular resource? Do we want to see fundamental changes in the presumptions and the conditions of production and consumption in order to create sustainability? Another question that we ask in the MA is, how do the past, present, and future connect sustainability? So my work is primarily historical. I've gained immeasurably from collaborating with Carlos and others at the institution to think about both current horizons of sustainable thinking, but also how we begin to imagine futures. What are the parameters and possibilities that we allow ourselves to think in order to reach pragmatic interventions to create sustainability? And that brings us to the question of whose voices count, which information, which data, which baselines and parameters do we create in order to think about sustainability? So there is local, national, international policy. There is local, national, and international advocacy. And of course, there is local, national, and international protest. How do we think about those various voices, articulations, formats, and authorities, authoritative iterations of how we shape more sustainable futures, how we broach the problem of climate and environmental catastrophe? So I want, for the remainder of this presentation, to think about three principal attributes of the programme. One is interdisciplinarity. One is the recognition and the acceptance, the active acceptance of complexity and difficulty, the fact that different orders and expression of interest exists, coexist in different landscapes and ecologies, and we need to be able to accept those ambiguities and that sense of discomfort in mediating and accepting the existence of what can be quite fundamentally different ways of understanding a problem and a challenge. And lastly, the importance of engaging with collaborative and creative engagement and methods, and that's something that the teaching of the programme deliberately promotes. So I want to introduce one of the key elements of the programme. So in the first term of the programme, each of the MA cohorts will enter into a navigating module. So Carlos and I will convene the course Navigating Sustainability and Global Environmental Futures. And this is this module is an orientation to the challenges of climate catastrophe, but also to the approaches of the programme. It is inherently interdisciplinary, so we will draw on expertise and research experience both across the faculty in different disciplines, but also from colleagues in the Lancaster Environment Science. And we'll ask a series of questions through those different methodologies, through those different perspectives, and we accept a sort of, or we anticipate that there is no problem that any one discipline, any one method can broach. So the kind of indicative sort of questions that we'll ask in the workshops and the seminars and the discussions in the first term. But one is about hope. You think about climate environmental catastrophe, the finite nature of our ways of living and our resource exploitation. And this can lead to a kind of sense of hopelessness, a sense of futility, which of course mitigates against active engagement and creative kind of problem solving. So one of the questions we ask is, how do we find hope in facing a planetary crisis? We'll also look at economies of climate change. How are new sort of economic horizons, how are new strategies for taxation, for corporate spending, for legislating resource use, consumption, supply chains, again, at the local, national and international level, how are they emerging? We'll look at how we set the parameters for agency, relevance and significance. So how do we think about the relationship between the social, the cultural, the political, in other words, the human and the non-human? How do we think about the agency of animals? How do we think about the agency of geology? How do we think about the agency of any number of aspects of the natural world? And that exploration encourages us to a certain extent to let go of the categories that we use to organize much of which presume that human beings have the right to arbitrate and to primarily benefit from orchestrations, from ways of ordering and classifying and exploiting what's called the natural world. We'll also think about the ways in which the experience and factors influencing climate and environmental change and catastrophe are translated and expressed between different cultural contexts. So we know this is something that's happening on a planetary scale. We know this is something that's happening in a huge variety of different orders, processes of engagement, cultural context, and languages. So we work with colleagues in languages and cultures to think about how we mediate understandings of climate catastrophe and problem solving, meeting the challenges of climate catastrophe between different language and cultural contexts. And that will, we hope, allow us to set the scene of thinking about new global horizons, thinking both locally and connecting the local to a planetary level of change. So to think about the future and to introduce future thinking, I wanted to introduce again an aspect of my own work. So I've become very, very interested in hydroponics and the invention of hydroponics in the late 1930s with a very rapid acceleration during the Second World War, largely through the auspices of the US military, in order to find ways of producing food in new ways, in new contexts, in new environments, particularly in island ecologies. This led to a great deal of futuristic thinking about the promise of hydroponics, which is essentially saying crops, foodstuffs can be grown without soil. And that led to the expression of a number of attitudes and approaches towards soil as being smelly, as being dirty, as being a necessary medium, but also a potential contaminant of crops. So soil is the medium for crop growth, but it's also the medium of parasites, of weeds, of poison. So I become particularly interested in a man called Sholto Douglas, who created a new system of hydroponic agriculture in India in the 1950s as part of a new wave of scientific innovation to try and revolutionize, as India did successfully, food production, make India self-sufficient. His hydroponic strategies led to a series of really interesting collisions. So, for example, in West Bengal in India, his hydroponic equipment was repeatedly smashed up by local peasants who saw his work as being potentially a threat to their livelihood. It also led to all sorts of, his career was very much a global one. So he works in the Gulf region, he works in Western Asia, he works in sub-Saharan Africa, where hydroponics is seen as a solution to the problem of ecological instability. This is a way of inserting agricultural production into what are otherwise potentially hostile and inhabitable environments. And he's very interested in the potential of hydroponics to create growth in urban environments, so people will be able to produce food for themselves on the top of the multi-story buildings, but also in deserts. And this, for me, is linked to this notion that certain landscapes are seen to owe a debt to human society. Deserts were seen as wasteland, which is a very particular evaluation of what a desert is, what a particular ecology is. So Sholto Douglas and others like him saw hydroponics as a way of allowing the desert to pay what it owed human society, to render the desert into a productive, fecund landscape. He also extended that promise to think about hydroponic production in lunar conditions. So he thinks about the moon, the colonization of the moon. Hydroponics is discussed a great deal in terms of interplanetary science. How do you grow food when you have no soil? I also wanted to offer that question of species selection, thinking again about the relationship between human orderings and human prioritizations and systems of extraction, production, consumption, what kind of selection and what kind of mentalities lie behind the selections of species that we regard to be amiable to our interests, but also inimicable. So I owe a thanks to Naomi Jacobs, who's leading the new Masters in Artificial Intelligence, who drew my attention to a citizen eradication drive from 2020 in Maryland, where ordinary people were encouraged to capture, kill, and return the corpses of lanternflies. So a proliferation of kind of environmental propaganda was produced, encouraging people to kill these insects. They were seen as invasive, they were seen as being inimical to the creation of cultivable crops and therefore human interest. And I'd invite us to think a little bit about the kind of language used in these organizations and hierarchies of species. So a term which is used a great deal along with parasite is invasive and alien species. So Japanese knotweed is a species that there has been widespread agency and NGO, government agency and NGO collaboration in trying to eradicate. It is non-native, it is invasive. Similarly, rhododendrons are seen as invasive and detrimental to native indigenous ecologies. Now, I'm not doubting the scientific veracity of both the threat of lanternflies to crops and also the species success of Japanese knotweed. But I think it is worth stepping back and thinking about the presumptions about ecologies and landscapes and environments that are the necessary preconditions for the identification of alien, invasive, non-native species. And lastly, I'd like to turn to that third principle, which is accepting difficulty. And for that, I've used the example of a case from 1981 where 2 raids were made on the indigenous settlement of Restigouche, the reserve of Restigouche, after there was a collision of local resource exploitation, fishing, and a set of Quebec state measures for marine conservation. And these things, sort of riverine conservation, these things directly collide. And of course, the Quebec state, the Quebec police are in a far greater position to enforce the restrictions that they see as being necessary for the conservation of salmon against localized interests and exploitation and relationships with the landscape. So there is no resource, there's no landscape, there's no ecology which is uncontested and which is not embedded within structural relationships. And that's something we'll think about very, very carefully. So in order to kind of embrace and to think about that complexity, that contested nature of any environment, we encourage students to work creatively and collaboratively, to sort of always have a dialogue in their thinking with other with other ways, with other perspectives, other ways of thinking, other perspectives. So I wanted to introduce another attribute of the teaching of the MA, which are the studio modules that take place in the second term. These studio modules are an attempt to encourage problem-based learning. So students will work both as individuated program cohorts, but also as broader cohorts, so including students studying artificial intelligence, students studying global challenges, students studying the global health humanities, to come together and find new ways of thinking about problems. So one of, and again, so Naomi drew my attention to this and I've become very, very interested. So how do we actively cultivate new perspectives on questions of ecology, of technology and society? And one way is to think off planet. Is to think, okay, if we take away all of those complexities of structural inequalities, of the conditions of capitalism, the legacies of imperialism, questions of the existing, sort of the extant structures of control that might exist in terms of property regimes or differential rights, established rights of access. We took all that away and we thought, what would life look like on Mars? How would we set about reconstructing ecologies? How would we set about creating new human relationships in relation to their immediate environments? And so off-planetary thinking will be a way of resetting our responses to earthly challenges, and developing fresh and collaborative responses and creative collaborations. So I've mentioned a number of times that Sustainability and Global Environmental Futures is one of 4 programs that are being launched: Global Medical and Health Humanities, Artificial Intelligence, Society and Global Challenges, and Global Challenges. And we want students on those programs both to develop their particular interests through the specifics of the program, but also to see themselves very much of being a cohort, of having some shared space of learning, but also spaces and opportunities for collaboration and cross-fertilization. So with that, I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Ben Dalton, who's going to talk about global medical and health humanities.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Deborah. And can everyone hear me and see me? Deborah, would it be all right if you did the slides for this? Oh, I don't know whether you can hear
Ben,
me,
I'm so
Debs.
sorry, I can't hear you.
Oh, okay.
Are you okay to share the slides?
Sorry, Debs, I don't know whether you can hear me, so I've just sent you a message. Oh, brilliant. Okay. Thanks so much, Debs. Yeah, hopefully you can all hear me. I think there's a slight kind of technical glitch with the sound going on. But very good to meet you all. So my name is Ben Dalton, and I'm a lecturer in French Studies in the School of Global Affairs. So as my kind of job title tells you, I kind of come from a background of languages and cultures research. I'm a lecturer in French Studies. However, all of my teaching and research looks in particular at the medical and health humanities, or links between French culture, philosophy, language, literature, film, etc., and medical and health context. So, for example, I am currently doing a project on the hospital and how contemporary French philosophers can help us think differently about hospital contexts and healthcare futures. So, Debs, if you could go to the next slide. Don't know whether you can hear me. Um, Brilliant. Thank you. What is the MA in Global Medical and Health Humanities? So the kind of statement at the heart of this MA is that biomedical science alone cannot solve the healthcare challenges of our times. So we need to understand the social, political, and cultural dimensions of healthcare and medicine. So Deborah has already mentioned in relation to the MA on sustainability how we need approaches across all different disciplines and these interdisciplinary and collaborative approaches. And this is very much what this particular MA does in relation to health and medical contexts. So the medical and health humanities are an interdisciplinary field which brings together the arts, humanities, and social sciences in approaching these questions. So we ask, how can the arts, humanities, and social sciences help us to face some of the biggest challenges facing healthcare? How can the arts, humanities, and social sciences help us imagine the healthcare of the future? And how can we understand further the social, political, and cultural dimensions of healthcare, medicine, illness, and well-being? So next slide, please, Debs. So these are some of the indicative topics that you might be able to learn about or research on the MA. So everything from narratives and artistic expressions of mental health or health, illness, and pain. So how people have written in literature or made films about or developed philosophies about their experience of illness and pain. You might look at sites of health activism and intervention, the collaborative design of future spaces such as inclusive environments and hospitals fit for purpose, the provision of health advocacy. We might also talk about the decolonization of health, moving beyond Eurocentric Anglophone perspective. So, as I said at the beginning, I'm a lecturer in French studies, and so I'm very much within the School of Global Affairs, looking at differences between languages and cultures. And this is something that the MA very much offers, this chance to move beyond Western, global North, Anglophone contexts and look at how health is conceptualized across the globe. We can also think about sustainability in healthcare, and this is one of those areas where we see crossover between the MA in global medical and health humanities and the MA that you've been exploring today with Deborah earlier as well. We also have colleagues whose research expertise lies in critical disability studies, LGBTQIA plus healthcare, and healthcare equality, and global histories of medicine and healthcare. So, as Deborah was saying, a lot of our research is focused on the futures of our world and of kind of human existence. So, Deborah was talking about sustainability futures. How can we imagine the kind of global environments and sustainability politics of the future on Earth, and even, as Deborah suggested at the end, beyond Earth as well? So, also within the healthcare context at Lancaster, we're thinking a lot about how do we imagine the future of health and the future of care? How do we design the medical and healthcare contexts of the future around the world? So one of these kind of opportunities that is currently presenting itself is that we're currently seeing the proposals for a new Lancaster hospital on the Bailrigg East site. So that's right next to the university. And this is really exciting because it offers unique opportunities to imagine healthcare and hospital futures kind of with a new hospital that's being developed right on our doorstep. And there are researchers across the university and researchers that will be teaching on this MA who are involved in projects thinking about how to design the hospitals of the future. And I'm very excited to be part of that as well. So some other current interdisciplinary projects in health at Lancaster include a huge project that's currently ongoing called the Futures of Human Reproduction. So that's all thinking about how we're going to imagine human reproduction in the future. Everything from kind of embryo ectogenesis to thinking about how we'll imagine birthing and elements of kind of gender, sexuality, and embodiment in the future as well. We also have a project, Creative Methodologies for Inclusive Healthcare Design Futures. I'm involved with that, and you can see in the photo there, that is one event that we've held in relation to this project. I'm working with my colleagues, Dr. Temidayo Eseonu in PPR and Dr. Naomi Jacobs in Leica. And that's a really exciting project that we're hoping will have impact on the current ideas of hospital design currently happening in Lancaster. There's another project called The Queer Lives of the Hospital that is all about LGBTQIA plus inclusivity in hospital design. And then my other project, Transforming the Hospital with Contemporary French Philosophy. So I've given you a brief snapshot of current futures research going on in healthcare research at Lancaster, but this is only a very small amount. There are many other projects going. And when you come to Lancaster, you'll see as well that there are lots of different research centres and networks for you to become involved in. So here in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, we have the FAST Health Hub that brings together researchers from across the university, from history, languages, philosophy, politics, law, etc., all working on areas relating to healthcare. Then beyond that, you have the wider Health at Lancaster projects. You also have the Collaboration Cafe that happens every Wednesday, bringing together academics and academic research with external partners working on a variety of different healthcare projects. So there really is a wealth of futures research going on at Lancaster and a wealth of interdisciplinary healthcare research going on at Lancaster. Next slide, please, Debs. I just thought I'd give you a kind of brief idea of just how exciting this research is. So we're looking at a bird's eye view now of Lancaster, and you can see right in the bottom centre there where the campus is. So that small bit of text that says Welcome Centre, that's about 100 meters from where I'm sitting at the moment, right behind me. So that's the campus. And then just over the other side of the M6, you can see that big blue square where the proposed site is for the replacement Royal Lancaster Infirmary. So all of this kind of very impactful futures health research is going on currently in the university, whilst very practically we're thinking about how to build these healthcare futures. Next slide, please, Debs. And because Deborah mentioned the kind of the future of sustainability and brought us to the book about the city on Mars, I thought I would just end with a bit of a provocation, in that some people are already starting to imagine what role kind of the hospital will play in human futures beyond planet Earth. And so projects such as the future of the hospital, which is being led by the Office for Metropolitan Architecture, the OMA, shows us just that. So they were originally commissioned to build a hospital in the Qatar desert, but I think, as you can see, and this is a screenshot from their project video that you can find on YouTube, they're also imagining the hospital of the future beyond planet Earth as well. So I think that kind of very blue sky, imaginative thinking of the future that Deborah was talking about extends also to us thinking about healthcare futures, kind of in the future of what we will go on to do on Earth and as humanity, I guess. So I'm going to leave it there. I think that's all from me. So back to you, Deborah. And yes, I will just maybe Deborah still can't hear me, but for those of you who want to find out more, you can visit the course pages. There are some QR codes here for future webinars, but you can also visit all of the course pages by clicking that link, Masters at Lancaster University. And we'll have the last webinar in the series on the 21st of March. In the meanwhile, please do get in touch with any one of us. I know Deborah will be very happy to talk to anyone interested about the MA in sustainability. I'll be more than happy to talk to anyone about the MA in global medical and health humanities. And if you're on campus as well, we also have a student drop-in session that is happening on it's on Alexandra Square in the work in progress space. So please do drop in if you want to have a chat with us. And with that, I think that concludes today's session. So thank you very much to everyone for joining. Thanks so much to you as well, Deborah, and to everyone present. And please do get in touch. So have a good day, everyone.